Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another Fresh CFO Fridays. I hope your Friday is going well. My Friday is doing great. I don't know about you, though, because it's already the 15th of March. We got 15 days left in Q1. Yes, 15 days left in the quarter. I feel like we were just talking in January, and then everybody knows February just flew by. February is one of those months where it's like, honestly, ask yourself, drop in the chat, like, what did you do in February, right? Like, I'm like, man, February was just like here and then it was gone. But hope your Friday's going well. Super excited about today's conversation. Let's jump right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering emotional intelligence in finance. So, if this is your first time stopping by, seeing us on a live, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all the different socials, this is your first time here, my name is Chris Ortega. I'm the CEO of Fresh FP&A. I run a global fractional CFO and advisory service company that empowers SMBs seeking financial clarity and growth. So, okay, jumping right into the topic. So, topic today is mastering emotional intelligence. And before I get started, one thing that I've always looked at through my 20 years career in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership was one of the biggest differentiators between like a good leader and a great leader is definitely having high EQ. You may see it be called EQ or whatever the different words that they go along with emotional intelligence. But I actually think that the key differentiator between a good and a great leader is a leader that has high emotional intelligence, right? So that is first thing I want to jump into is when you look at emotional intelligence versus IQ in finance. Typically, when you look at the finance organization, you look at accounting, you look at FP&A, you look at CFO professionals, we are all about having the IQ. That's what we want to lead with. We want to be the smartest Excel person. We want to be the smartest that knows ASC 606 or IFRS 15 or ASC 842. Shout out to all my accountants. You know what that is, right? But we focus so much on the IQ side of what we bring to the business. And for me, one of the biggest things that you can have in a finance team, particularly when we work with small SMB organizations, is having that high tolerance of emotional intelligence. And before I jump into it, I want to share a quick story about having high emotional intelligence inside of a finance team and how that can be advantageous for you. So, when I moved from being an individual contributor to being a leader, and this was my first time, I was at a software company. I was moving into I was a senior FP&A person before, and I'm moving into a manager of finance, manager of FP&A, and everybody, I failed in that transition. The reason why I failed in that is because I didn't have really high, I was so used to having my IQ be the skill set, everything I came about when it came to project. I wanted to prove that I knew the most about Power BI. I knew the most about the systems that we were using. Like I leveraged so much on the IQ being my strongest skill set. But when you move into leadership in a finance organization and you start to manage people, IQ is not really like the golden ticket to the Willy Wonka factory of leadership, right? EQ was. And I failed at that because when I moved into that leadership position, I was so used that all my wins, all my successes, all the home runs that I hit, that I was so used to winning for my own that all of my success was going to come through my team. And I remember a very distinct conversation, and I was having a conversation with the business manager. She reported directly to me when I got promoted, when I was the manager of finance at this high growth SaaS company. And she would come to me with problems, and she would come to me about things that she was frustrated with. And this is a typical fundamental fallacy I think a lot of professionals find themselves in. But she would come to me with problems, and I would always think as a leader, I had to provide every solution, right? So she would come to me and say, man, I'm having trouble with Paylocity. Like some of our tax coding, it's taking me a long time to like really understand the payroll process. It could be a lot more efficient. So as a new leader, my mind went into solutioning mode, right? My mind went into providing her solutions. How can we jump on a call? How can we do this? How can we do that? What are some remedies? Like, I went into damage control. And I remembered conversations, and she sat me down one day. She says, Chris, it's not about the nail. And she said that to me, and I was like, I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, what do you mean? She says, Chris, a lot of times when we sit in our one-on-ones, when I'm talking with you, I'm not actually looking for solutions and recommendations. I know how to do that. Part of what I'm coming to you as my leader and talking about is I just want you to understand, support, and hear that I'm frustrated and hear that I'm coming, that I have these challenges, and listen and be the person that says, hey, Chris, hey, I understand that you're frustrated. And I understand so like that was a critical point in my career where I failed in that because I didn't listen, but more so than anything, I didn't listen to the emotion side of it, right? I was supportive in terms of solutions, but I was not supportive in terms of service. So that's one key thing about emotional intelligence. It's very sometimes as a leader, and listen, I know it's hard, right? You're looking at it and your brain starts to spin. I find myself all the time when I get situations or somebody's frustrated or somebody's angry or somebody's dealing with some challenge, you automatically go into that solutioning mode, right? A lot of times as the CEO of Fresh FP&A, I have to stop myself and say, Chris, let that person have that time to express that emotion, to express it and understand what it was, right? And a lot of times I would listen and I would sit back with my team, I would sit back with our clients, I'll sit back with our partners, and I'll reframe what that emotion is and say, hey, thank you for sharing that with me. You seem to be frustrated. Is that a fair assessment? They're like, yes. Sometimes one of the most important things in as leaders, right? And I know for me, if you see like this sleeve right here that you're looking at, those are my emotions. I wear them 1000% on my sleeve, right? But I have to find myself. And with people, sometimes you have to take that moment and allow them to have that time to express that emotion. Because a lot of times they're not looking for that solution. They're not looking for that recommendation. They're not looking for that answer. They're looking for that audience to say, I'm experiencing an emotion, and you, as my leader, you, as my teammate, you, as my partner, you, as a business owner, they want to have that opportunity to express that emotion. So that's one of the first takeaways I want to talk about when you're looking at that EQ versus IQ in finance, right? And I know how difficult that transition is. Like I just said, I just shared a story with you where I failed at it. But again, getting back to what I mentioned earlier, that is one key differentiator that makes a great leader. The second takeaway I want to talk about is specifically around stress management and leadership. So, kind of gave that example where we talked about, the leadership and moving into that. I'll give you another example in working with the client that we had at Fresh FP&A. So, we were working with the client, and they were going through an acquisition, right? They were looking to buy another business. And throughout the conversations and throughout the negotiations of this merger and acquisition, we were on the buy side, they were on the sell side. There was, with the owners, even with myself, there was a lot of, what are they doing? There was so many moments through that acquisition and through that negotiation and through that entire process where me, the CEO and the other founder of the business, we were scratching our heads. We were like, what is going on here? And we had this, and one of the situations that we got from that was one of the owners, we were a lot more experienced. I've been through mergers and acquisitions before. That's primarily most of my career was building, shaping, scaling, and exiting finance organizations. So this wasn't my first rodeo. The other founder of the organization, this wasn't his first time, and he's a seasoned business professional. So we have a lot of experience in going through successful and non-successful mergers and acquisitions. So throughout our time, we had an inherent bias that we're scratching our heads on, like, why is this negotiation and why is this acquisition going this way? Like, why are we talking about some of the things that we're talking about? But it really took a fresh perspective from the other owner that really helped us, like, say, hey, I remember the conversation. The owner, she said to us, she said, guys, I know you guys have a lot of experience in this, and I know that this is frustrating, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're showing up, because this is a very important acquisition to us, and this is a very important opportunity for us to continue growth in our business, and we need to focus on that. So I know that it's frustrating. I know that both of you experienced business professionals, finance CFO, and the other person was a marketing leader in building billion-dollar businesses. But it took that point to say, hey guys, like, so I think in that example that I'm sharing with you, a lot of times in leadership and that stress management side and that negotiation, ultimately we were able to get through it, but we had to pause and be self-aware of the biases that we brought into that situation. And that really was like, we were scratching our head. Me and the other owner, we were like, man, I think this deal is done. Like, we're spending so much time on this, like, I don't understand it. And a lot of times the key application from those situations is you have to be able to take that step back, right? And when I say take that step back, I call it taking an emotional breath, right? The other leader that expressed that and helped set that clarity for us, we were taking a lot of emotional breaths in the situation, and it helps set that clarity with us. And ultimately, we end up leading them through the acquisition, and it's becoming a prosperous opportunity for that client that we work through, right? And it also talks about the other aspect of it in terms of leadership that I think finance should have, which is empathetic leadership. I am probably one of the strongest proponents of having empathy in leadership, not sympathy. So a lot of times you get that confused, right? Sympathy is saying, hey, I'm sorry you're going through that, or you had a bad day. I'm really sorry that that's happening to you. Sympathy and empathy are completely different. Empathy is looking at that situation and envisioning yourself going through that, right? Envisioning yourself going through that difficult acquisition, envisioning yourself going through that difficult time period where you're challenged with cash, or you're living, you can immerse yourself and you can see the perspective, views, and insights from somebody else's perspective. That emotional leadership is a superpower, right? And that's one key aspect that I think a lot of finance, CFO, FP&A professionals can have inside the business. So many times inside the business, we just look at it from this quantitative, we look at it from this like calcular perspective, right? We look at it as always cost benefit, right? I got $1. Is that dollar going to make me $2 or $3, or is it making me less than $1? Right. But when we're talking about managing that stress and leadership inside of a business, we have to change our reference point. And I think empathy and bringing leadership into that's that example that I shared. That was empathetic leadership. And I remember taking the founder aside and said, thank you for that. I needed that check and balance because I know inherently my experience, my expertise, and kind of leading through acquisitions and leading through acquisitions that didn't happen as well too, I had that inherent bias. So that's one thing. That's a second key takeaway that I want you to have when you're looking at mastering your emotional intelligence, right? One of the best ways is slow down. I have a great mentor of mine. His name is Chris Landis. Shout out to Chris Landis. He's the CEO at Tesserio, and he's awesome. Trusario, and absolutely amazing leader. And one of the things I've always taken away from him, and still as a mentor now, he helps me around at Fresh FP&A. He's always a great resource when I'm having business challenges, because I don't have this all figured out. Some of you may, like, I get messages on LinkedIn and email sometimes. It's like, guys, look, I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out. So I am not the person to say I have it all figured out and I have this whole entrepreneurship journey down to a science. But one thing that I've always appreciated about Chris Landis is he was the master of the pause, right? So when you're in a very stressful situation, you're in a heightened situation, a lot of times in that stress situation, this is just physiology, right? This is just when you're in a very high, intense, stressful situation, typically that activates your sympathetic nervous system inside of your body, right? So that's going to activate your fight or flight response. And when you look at it in business, when you look at it in finance, when it's a highly stressful situation, you either want to drive right to it or you just want to be like, hey, I'm out of here, right? One thing that Chris was masterful at in very heightened situations, and there was a lot of battles that me and Chris went through. We went through fundraising. We went through, fundraising. We went through exiting businesses. We went through exiting people. We went through acquisitions. Like me and Chris have went through a lot. We've been in a lot of wars together, and I've always appreciated how Chris would master in a very heightened situation. I would always look at him. At the time, I was a report back in that example that I was mentioning. He was the CFO of the organization, and I was the manager of finance. So I reported directly to him. And I always value how in that situation, Chris would take his time, he would gather his thoughts, he would slow down. And it sometimes, let me be honest, Chris, don't take a jab at this, bro. It's all love, Chris. Hey, ladies, you know this is all love, bro. But it would be kind of awkward sometimes how the pause would go because it would be like we would be sitting there, right? And it'd be like a direct question asked to him. And it would get to a point where it was like an awkward kind of transition. But every time Chris took that time, and when Chris was ready to speak, and when Chris was ready to respond to what that inquiry or what that question was, it was clear, it was concise, and it was direct, and it was actionable, and it was easy to understand. And I always took from a leadership in a stressful situation from Chris and said, that is the kind of leader that I want to be. That is when it's stressful, when a lot of chaos is going on. I can take that time. I can calm down my literal body, right? I don't have to go in fight or flight response. I can calm down. I can find my clarity. I can be centered and clearly communicate concisely exactly what the situation is, what my response to it is, and make it easy to understand. So, that's another tip that I have for you when you're dealing with mastering your emotional intelligence in stressful and leadership situations. Master the art of the pause. I'll make sure in this live in this YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll make sure to drop a link in the description of a great video of mastering the art of the pause. But seriously, that is a superpower when you're in these highly stressful situations and you have that opportunity to master that emotional intelligence. Leverage the pause. So that's my second takeaway, right? The first one we talked about was, building that emotional intelligence and how it should be greater than your IQ in finance. The second takeaway and kind of the story that I mentioned in there, some action and practical tips that you can leverage around stress in leadership and dealing with and mastering your emotional intelligence. The second thing is like, let's get into the details, right? Let's get into some practical strategies and tips that you can implement to build that emotional intelligence. So, one of the biggest opportunities, and I share a story with you around navigating uncertainty and challenge. You look at the macro environment that we're in right now. We're in a political year in the United States. We continue to see maybe the R word recession in the United States. We see the global impact. There's a lot of macro factors that are affecting SMB businesses, affecting your career. You constantly see the different big organizations making layoffs and the pivots and the changes. It is a crystal ball right now. There's a lot of uncertainty and challenge. And I think no bigger uncertainty and challenge that happened for finance teams. And a story that I like to share was back in 2020. Let's rewind the clock. Let's rewind the clock. This time, right? This time period we're in 4 years ago, right? That was during the pandemic. You talk about uncertainty, you talk about challenge, you talk about speed, you talk about being able to navigate that. At the time, I was leading a software company, I was leading the finance organization, and we were in high growth mode. And when the pandemic happened, we were servicing our clients. We were selling a marketing technology tool that serviced retail and e-commerce businesses. That was our primary vertical. That was the 9-figure business that we were building. That was everything that we were focused on. And you see in the United States, I don't know everywhere else where what it was happening, but things shut down. Everything was shut down. And I remember walking into the first leadership meeting when, mind you, our clients are retail and e-commerce. A lot of them have bricks and mortars location. A lot of them, that was everything from a revenue perspective in their business. And now things are closed, quickly having to pivot to e-commerce. There was so many changes. And I remember being tasked with an update. We had to make sure we course corrected and made sure that we had the cash flow, that made sure we had the people, made sure we had the value that we didn't know how long that was going to last, right? During the pandemic, I didn't know if this was going to be 2 months, 30 days, the whole rest of the year. Nobody had that insight, right? And one of the most difficult situations that I was tasked with in leading that finance organization was I had a directive to say, Chris, you need to be able to look at your headcount in your finance organization, and you may have to make some exiting decisions of some people, right? We need to make sure, ultimately, we need to make sure we're driving the cash flow that we need and the cash burn that we need to sustain however long this is going to go. And we were banking on that. At a minimum, we were conservative on 12 months. At least the next year, this is how it was going to go. And that was what I was tasked with. That was the situation. And I remember being tasked with that and looking at my resources and looking at the head count. And I remember going and I took a pause, going back to what I mentioned earlier. And I said, Chris, this moment in time is going to be a key. This is the moment to define and to walk the walk and talk the talk of how people focus that you are in the organization. Like, this is it. And I remember being in that moment and said to myself, like, I get it from the business perspective, but the most important asset and the longest value that we're going to get right now is making sure we keep as many people employed as possible, right? Like, now's not the time, through this uncertainty, through this challenge, through this adversity, through families, all the different, again, getting back to that empathy and living in that, right? Living and breathing in that situation for people with families and all of that stuff, and families and difficulties and challenges and the coronavirus and all this. I was living in that. And as an emotional person, that was very tough for me. That was a very tough moment because I know I had to make sure I think about the people, but how do I balance the people and the business side? And ultimately, what I recommended to the leaders, I made the recommendation to the leadership and said, listen, the most important thing we need to do right now is continue to service our customers and make sure we're providing value to them and make sure we're helping them through this adversity and we're supported through this adversity. And we need to make sure we keep people here. We keep them impacted and valued inside of our organization. So my recommendation was for the leadership team to take cuts in our salaries, to forgo bonuses. I made sure from a financial perspective, I looked at every single piece of financial information that wouldn't affect people that we can trim down as much as possible. I know personally for myself, I took a 50% reduction in my salary. I forgoed all my bonus. I forgoed everything and said, I want to make sure all this money gets back and reinvested into our people, right? If it means that we have to sacrifice in the interim as leaders to make sure we're retaining our team, that's what we need to do. From the customer perspective, our CEO made the recommendations that we're going to continue to provide as much free support and services and solutions to help businesses move quickly over from bricks and mortars to e-commerce. We're going to do that, right? And we're not going to charge the customers for that. And that was a big thing. You got sales and marketing like, what? And I never forget Ohio making that decision and said, we need to make sure this is about relationship right now. This is the defining moment. And with that understanding, right, we were able to keep our team. And also, Talk about another process we navigated the whole time. The PPP process, the Paychecks Protection Program. I don't even remember what it was. Craziest situation I was a part of. Craziest thing ever. But we were able to do that. So our initiative to make sure we kept people actually helped us from being part of that process, right? And ultimately we kept people. And I remember the finance after the dust settled, after like things start opening back up in like May, June timeframe, right? I remember a staff member coming to me that was on my team and said, Chris, I can't even imagine how much stress, how much sacrifice, everything that you did to make sure that during this time we were able to keep our jobs and you were able to show up every day ready, able, and supportive of not only the team, but of our clients and of our business. And I commend you for that, right? Now, making those decisions, I wasn't looking for that, but that was like the biggest moment as a leader where I was just like, my heart felt so, I felt not only great as being a business leader, but more so than anything, as a leader and as a human going through that, that was the biggest moment for me, right? And there's no way I think I would have been able to navigate that or stand tall or be the kind of leader, the finance leader that I wanted to be if I didn't find ways to practically implement and master my emotional intelligence, right? So that's a really key insight and a very great situation in trying to go through. Some other practical ways that I think you can master your emotional intelligence. Here's a great framework that I want to give to you. A great framework to mastering your emotional intelligence is when you're in those moments and you feel emotional, acknowledge the emotion, right? Maybe not say it out loud. That'd be kind of weird if you're sitting there having a conversation with me and I say, I'm stressed out. Like that. Do not do that, right? That'd be like socially awkward and that'd be weird. But master yourself inside. A lot of times when I'm in an emotional state, I acknowledge the emotion. I say, man, I'm happy in my head. I'm saying that in my head, right? I'm not saying it out loud, right? That'd be like the Joker kind of thing, right? That'd be kind of weird. But I acknowledge the emotion, right? Because if you acknowledge it, and I think one of the practical tips and strategies you can implement is self-awareness and increasing your emotional intelligence. Self-awareness and self-acknowledgement of the emotion, that's like step 1 and 2, right? If you can acknowledge and say, I am frustrated. The next framework that you get to is say, what is it about the situation or the person or the overall place that you're in that's making you frustrated, right? Now you can get into like the root cause of what is driving that behavior, right? And say, well, I'm frustrated in this situation because I feel like the person's not listening to me, right? Which I found myself in a lot of those situations. And that's why I take myself back and I just listen, right? But if you acknowledge it and say, I am frustrated in this situation, this adversity, this challenge, this opportunity that you're in, and this is why I feel this way, then you can say, okay, well, hey, I just want to make sure you're understanding what I'm saying. Now you can get that real-time feedback from a person. Now you can say, I'm feeling frustrated, and the reason why I feel frustrated is because I don't feel like you're listening. Now you can say, hey, Chris, I just want to make sure that you're understanding what I'm saying, and I'm like, yeah, great. I hear you. I totally understand what you're saying. Now you got that acknowledgement of it. And in that quick cycle, you were able to identify the emotion. You were able to identify the root cause. And in a real time situation, you were able to proactively resolve it, right? You were able to do that. So that's a real simple, practical way, right? A lot of times people don't acknowledge that emotion and don't really drive in the root cause of it. And you may be challenging me and say, Chris, well, I don't know if I'm ready to do that in real time. That's totally fine. Take that moment and just say, acknowledge it and take some time, maybe after the meeting's over, maybe after the conversation that you had, and spend that time and that self-inventory and that self-awareness to understand why. Because you're going to find yourself in that situation again, right? You're going to find yourself frustrated. You're going to find yourself angry. You're going to find yourself happy. And these can be good emotions too. I know I'm not like Debbie Downer in the whole situation where it's all about bad emotions, but you're going to find yourself feeling that same emotion. Acknowledge it, identify the root cause, and proactively address it and try to understand, like, hey, should I be really feeling this way? And is there a way that I could course correct the situation? So that's another easy, simple tip that I use all the time. I use that in meetings. I use that when I'm super packed. Like right now, I'm going to say I'm happy. And the reason why I'm happy is I get the opportunity to talk with you and share so much knowledge, wisdom, skills, passion that I have throughout my career. And the best way that you can acknowledge me is in the chat, in the comments, like, Chris, you're on point, man. Thank you so much. I feel more empowered to master my emotional intelligence. There's a quick framework right there. But those are some practical tips. In recap, we talked about the key advantage of EQ versus IQ inside of your finance teams as a CFO. It's a superpower. CFOs, to you, I'm looking at you. Put on that chief feelings officer hat. Take off the finance officer hat sometimes. Get into the feelings. Get comfortable with the warm and fuzzies. Give the feedback proactively. Don't wait for 6 months. Handle the situations. Take the art of the pause. The second thing we talked about is how do you master emotional intelligence in those stressful leadership situations. So gave you some examples of that, gave you some practical tips in there. And then we got into the depth. We got into the deepness of it, building and giving you some insights and some practical tips on how you can take now and go implement and build and master your emotional intelligence. So, hey, appreciate this conversation. If you've enjoyed this and you've looked at us on all the different streams, if this has been value for you, make sure to smash that like button. That way you don't, and also if you don't want to miss any future CFO Fridays, I got another one next week. That one is going to be really, really good. Just giving you a heads up. I'm going to be talking with Susanna Rodriguez Griffin, who's the CEO of La Jefa Promotions and also my former boxing coach. We're going to be talking about boxing and business, the balance, the beautiful balance between both. That's going to be a really good one. So if you don't want to miss that one, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. If you're looking at us on YouTube, connect with me, follow with me. My challenge to you as you're going about your week and your weekend, find those subtle ways to start building that emotional intelligence. It's a superpower for you. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for your insights. I appreciate it. And as I'll always end, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it. Everybody, have a great Friday. St. Patty's Day is here. Have a great time. Be safe. Have a lot of fun. Celebrate St. Patty's Day. I may or may not have a Guinness or mock me down a Guinness. Guinness is a thick beer. I feel like anytime it's like Guinness, it's like I'm drinking like chocolate milk with like a little shot in it or something. But have a great weekend. Thank you so much for your time and keep it fresh.